There is a lie that high performers rarely say out loud, but they organize their entire lives around it. And that lie is what takes other people down will not take me down. Other people burn out. They lose their edge. People damage their relationships. Other people ignore the warning signs until their bodies are forced to stop, but not you. You are disciplined, resilient. You know how to function under pressure. Listen, you've carried responsibilities that would overwhelm most people. You've built organizations, managed crises, protected payroll, made impossible decisions, and delivered results while everyone else was still trying to understand problems. So somewhere along the way, you started believing that your capacity was unlimited. Not because you're arrogant. Well, some of you are. Not necessarily, but because your history keeps providing evidence that you can survive more than most people. You have been exhausted before and you kept going, disappointed and you've still performed. You've been hurt and no one even knew it. You worked through grief, pressure, conflict, uncertainty, and physical pain. And because you survived it, you begin to confuse survival with immunity. But surviving pressure does not mean pressure is not changing you. Performing well does not mean you are well. And being able to carry more does not mean carrying more is no longer costing you. That's the invincible lie. And eventually, every lie creates a reckoning. This episode is not about teaching you how to manage your calendar better. It's not a conversation about morning routines, meditation apps, or taking a longer vacation. And this is not another leadership development lecture telling executives how to practice self-care. No, this conversation goes deeper because burnout at the executive level is rarely caused by a lack of information. More senior leaders already know they should rest. They know they should exercise and they should create boundaries. They've heard it all before. They know they should be more present with their families, should not answer every email after midnight. The problem isn't that high-performing leaders do not know what healthy behavior looks like. The problem is that many of them have developed an identity that makes healthy behavior feel incompatible with who they believe they must be. They do not simply work hard. They have become the person who can always handle more. They don't simply solve problems. They've become the person everyone depends on when the situation becomes difficult. They don't simply achieve. Their value, visibility, authority, and security have become connected to their ability to produce. That is why this conversation requires more than a wellness checklist. It requires a reckoning with identity, power, fear, and the behavioral patterns that hide behind exceptional performance. Welcome to Lena Speaks, the podcast, where we examine the hidden leadership behaviors, culture risk, and decision-making patterns that shape organizations long before the consequences become visible. I'm Lena Morris, founder and CEO of Authentic Encounters, LLC. I work with CEOs, executive teams, senior leaders, boards, and organizations to uncover the leadership and culture risks that traditional training often fails to reach. Because organizations rarely break down from the lack of talent alone. They break down when pressure reveals patterns that no one was willing to confront. This is week 3 of the Reckoning series, and today we are confronting the invisible lie. Why high performers believe they're the exception to burnout. One of the most dangerous misconceptions about burnout is that it always looks like collapse. Sometimes it does. Sometimes a leader reaches a point where they cannot get out of bed. They can't concentrate. They can't make decisions, and they cannot continue to work. But executive burnout often looks very, very different. It can look like increased control, shorter patience, more irritation, less curiosity, faster decisions with less consultation, constant urgency, and a growing belief that no one else can be trusted to carry the work. The leader is still producing, the company may still be growing, metrics still look very strong, the calendar is full, the leader is visible, decisions are being made. From the outside, everything appears to be working, but internally, the leader's range is shrinking. They have less emotional flexibility, relational capacity, patience for complexity, less ability to separate an actual threat from an inconvenience. They may still be effective, but they are becoming more expensive to be around. That cost may show up in executive turnover. It also might show up in silence during meetings, decisions that are technically correct but poorly executed because no one felt safe challenging their assumptions. It may show up in a spouse or a partner who has stopped asking for connection because they are tired of competing with the business. It also might show up with children who have learned that the leader is physically present but psychologically unavailable. And your body speaks as well. Chronic pain, disrupted sleep, digestive problems, headaches, high blood pressure, anxiety. A body that begins delivering messages that leaders' ambitions refuse to hear. Here is your first reckoning. Burnout does not always remove your ability to perform. Sometimes it removes your ability to perceive what your performance is costing everyone around you. That distinction matters because high performers often use continued productivity as proof that nothing is wrong. They say things like, I'm still getting the results. What's the problem? I'm still showing up. I'm here every day. I handle everything. This organization needs me. My team would tell me if there was a problem. Trust me, they would. But results do not always tell the full truth about leadership health. A leader can be delivering the quarter and damaging the culture. They can be executing revenue goals and losing relational credibility. Performance can delay the reckoning. It cannot eliminate it. Why do high-performing CEOs and executives believe they are the exception? Because high performance creates its own evidence loop. You push beyond the reasonable limit. And then on top of that, you succeed. The organization praises the outcomes, your reputation grows. The next demand becomes larger. You push again, you succeed again. And every successful survival teaches you the same lesson. See, you can handle it. But in there is a flaw. You are measuring whether you completed the task. You are not measuring what it required you to become in order to complete it. You are measuring the output, but you're not measuring the erosion. You see visible win, but you don't measure the invisible withdrawals. And because the consequences may not appear immediately, the behavior feels sustainable. This is how leaders gradually normalize what should have been treated as a warning sign. Sleeping 4 hours becomes a commitment. Missing family milestones becomes the sacrifice. Consistent irritability becomes intensity. Emotional disconnection becomes focus. Never turning off becomes leadership. And eventually, dysfunction receives a promotion because it keeps producing results. Let me say that again. Dysfunction often survives in executive leadership because it has learned how to produce. This is why the issue can be difficult for boards, executive teams, and organizations to confront. The leader may be generating measurable value. That's undeniable. They are a visionary. They are a primary rainmaker, so to speak. They hold the critical relationships. They may be the reason the company survived a difficult season. So people tolerate the behavioral consequences. They explain them away. They protect the leader from honest feedback. They lower expectations around emotional intelligence because the leader is considered indispensable. But indispensability is often one of the greatest executive risks in an organization. Because when everything depends on one leader's continued capacity, the organization does not have strength. It has exposure. And when the leader's identity depends on being indispensable, they may unconsciously resist building the very systems, people, and trust that reduce that exposure. The organization becomes dependent on that leader, and the leader becomes dependent on being needed. That is not simply a workload problem. It is a leadership risk. For some leaders, pressure sharpens performance. A deadline can create clarity. A crisis can activate focus. A difficult challenge can bring forward courage and creativity. But there is a difference between being capable under pressure and requiring pressure to fully feel alive. Some executives have spent so much of their careers in high-stakes environments that calm begins to feel uncomfortable. And when there is no crisis, they create it. When the team becomes stable, they introduce something that's an unnecessary disruption. When people need time to think, the leader accelerates the decision. And when the organization needs integration, the leader adds another initiative. They believe they are driving performance, but sometimes they are recreating the emotional environment in which they have learned to feel most powerful. Here is the leadership quote I want you to remember. A leader who can only feel effective in crisis will eventually make crisis a part of the culture. That does not mean the leader is intentionally harming the organization, but it can mean their nervous system, identity, and leadership habits may have become organized around urgency. They trust themselves most when the stakes are very high. They feel valuable when everybody needs them. They feel clear when there is a problem to solve. But mature executive leadership is not only demonstrated by how well you perform in chaos, it is demonstrated by whether your presence reduces unnecessary chaos for everyone. High performers are always one season away from rest. After the launch, after the merger, after the board meeting, after the new hire, after the company reaches the next revenue goal. But the next season keeps arriving before the current one has been emotionally completed. The leader changes projects without changing pace. They leave one crisis and enter another without recovering. They call that momentum. Their body experiences it as cumulative stress. The executive says, "This is temporary." But temporary behavior repeated for years becomes a lifestyle. Temporary urgency repeated across an organization becomes culture. And temporary absence repeated in relationships becomes disconnection. You cannot keep borrowing capacity from your future self without eventually receiving the bill. So you say, no one else can carry this. Sometimes that belief is partly true. It really is. The leader may genuinely possess knowledge, experience, relationships, or authorities that others just simply do not have. But over time, no one else can carry this, can become a self-reinforcing leadership pattern. The leader does not delegate because others are not ready. Others do not become ready because the leader does not delegate. It's a cycle. The leader steps in because the team lacks confidence. The team lacks confidence because the leader keeps stepping in. The leader rewrites the work, corrects every detail, overrides most of the decisions, joins every meeting, and approves almost every move, then points to the team's dependency as proof that they cannot step away. But the inability to step away is not always proof of a leader's value. Sometimes it's evidence of a system that the leader has failed to build. That may be uncomfortable to hear, but this series is called The Reckoning for a reason. If your organization cannot function without your constant intervention, you have not built leadership capacity. You have built organizational dependence. And dependence will eventually exhaust the leader and weaken the whole enterprise. High-performing leaders are often excellent at detecting risk in the business. You can see declining margins, operational inefficiencies, market disruptions, talent gaps, competitive threats, regulatory exposure, customer dissatisfaction. They can identify what is changing before others even recognize it. But many executives struggle to apply that same level of risk assessment to themselves. They treat their own deterioration as a private issue rather than an organizational concern. They say, "I'm just tired. I just need a few days off. I have a lot going on. I'm just under pressure." But a CEO's internal condition rarely stays internal. It enters the organization through decisions, tone, timing, availability, reactivity, communication, conflict, and what the leader tolerates or refuses to confront. The organization experiences the leader's internal state even when the leader never names it. That means the executive burnout is not simply a personal wellness concern. It becomes a governance, a succession, a culture, retention, strategic decision making, a business continuity concern. That is why boards and executive teams should not wait for a visible collapse before addressing behavioral changes in a senior leader. You do not wait for the building to burn down before asking why the alarms were ignored. You examine the smoke, good people. You pay attention to changes in the temperament. You notice when collaboration declines, when the leader stops listening and becomes deaf. Notice when the leader's identity becomes fused with the organization. You can't tell the difference between the two. Or when every challenge is treated like a test of loyalty. Because by the time the crisis becomes visible, the warning signs may have been present for months or even years. Here's another quote I want you to sit with. A crisis is often the moment the truth becomes visible, not the moment the problem began. The reckoning does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives through a diagnosis, sometimes through a panic attack, through a leader's resignation that nobody expected, sometimes through a spouse saying, I cannot keep living like this. And it might be your adult child saying, you were there, but you were never really with us. And sometimes it's through a board asking whether the organization is too dependent on one person, through a failed decision that the leader made too quickly because exhaustion had narrowed their judgment. And sometimes the reckoning is quieter. The leader reaches a milestone they worked years to achieve and feels almost nothing. The company grows, but they're not satisfied. The applause comes, but it does not land. The next achievement is already required before the current one can be experienced and acknowledged. That is one of the clear signs that achievement has stopped being an expression of purpose and started becoming a method of emotional escape. Because when you cannot stop, the question is no longer simply whether you are driven. The question is, what are you afraid you will feel when you become still? For some leaders, stillness reveals grief, loneliness, fear. For others, the realization that their identity outside of the organization has become dangerously underdeveloped. And for some, stillness reveals a truth that they have avoided for years. They no longer know whether they want what they have worked so hard to protect. And that is a difficult truth. But ignoring it does not make it less true. It only makes the eventual reckoning more expensive. Let me pause here because this is exactly why I created the summer reset rooms. You do not always need another conference, another book. You may not need more information, good people. Sometimes you need a room where you can stop performing long enough to tell yourself the truth. The Leadership Reset Room is a live virtual space for leaders who are carrying pressure, responsibility, decision fatigue, organizational complexity, and the weight of being the person everyone expects to have the answer. We meet on Tuesdays from 12:05 to 12:55 p.m. Eastern Time. It is designed to help you examine the leadership patterns shaping your decisions, your relationships, your team, and the culture around you. Then we have the Relationship Reset Room. It meets on Thursday nights from 7:30 p.m. to 8:20 p.m. Eastern Time. It's for people who recognize that success in one area of life does not protect the relationships from neglect, disconnection, miscommunication, or unresolved tension. These are not passive webinars. They are facilitated conversations created to help you pause, reflect, reset, and make a different decision before crisis makes the decision for you. You can join an individual session, select the full series, or choose the option that best fits the reset you need. Visit AuthenticEncountersLLC.com and choose the reset room that is right for you. Because you don't need more advice, you need room. And while you're here, make sure you like this episode, share it with another leader, and subscribe to Lena Speaks, the podcast. Your engagement helps this conversation reach CEOs, executives, founders, board members, and high-performing professionals who might need to confront this truth before their own reckoning arrives. I want to leave you with 5 questions. Not 5 tips or 5 productivity strategies, 5 questions, because the right question can reveal what another strategy allows you to avoid. Question 1: what are people experiencing from me that my results may be hiding? Your performance may be strong, but what is your presence communicating? Do people experience clarity or anxiety when they are around you? Do they experience challenge or constant threat? Accountability or humiliation? Confidence or control? Are you still creating the conditions for thoughtful executive decision making? Or has everyone learned to read your mood before you speak? A culture that constantly monitors the leader's emotional state cannot fully focus on work. Question 2: what have I normalized that should concern me? What behavior would concern you if you saw it in someone else? The lack of sleep, constant agitation, missed appointments multiple times, emotional withdrawal, the reliance on work, alcohol, food, shopping, or any other behavior to avoid pressure, the inability to sit through dinner without checking your phone, the fact that every vacation becomes a remote office, that people have stopped asking whether you are available because they already know the answer. High performers are skilled at creating reasonable explanations for unreasonable patterns, but explanations do not eliminate impact. Question 3: who can tell the truth without fearing the consequences? Not who agrees with you, not who supports your strategy, but who can look you in your eye and say, you know what? You're not yourself. You're hurting and you're hurting people. You are making decisions out of fear. You know what, partner? You're not listening. You need help. And when they say it, do you become curious or do you immediately begin to build a case for why they are wrong? A leader without truthful relationships is not protected by authority. They are isolated by it. Question 4: what would break if I stopped for 2 weeks? Your answer will tell you something important about the organizational design you created. Would decisions stop? Would relationships be at risk? Would your team become paralyzed? Would they even know what to prioritize? Would the organization function just fine, but would you struggle emotionally with the fact that you're not needed? The final possibility deserves attention because sometimes the business is more prepared for the leader to step away than the leader is prepared to discover that the business can survive without them. Then question 5: what am I sacrificing that success cannot replace? There are losses that revenue cannot restore, conversations that cannot be recreated. There are years with your children that never return, and there are relationships that can survive neglect for so long. Health consequences that achievement cannot negotiate away. There is a version of you that can become so buried beneath responsibility that eventually you no longer remember who you were before everyone needed something from you. Ambition is not an enemy. Excellence is not the enemy. Neither is drive. The danger is believing that success gives you permission to ignore the limits that make you human. Here's the truth high performance often refuse to admit until it's too late. You are not the exception. Your title does not make you immune. Your intelligence doesn't make you immune. Neither does revenue. Your faith, your resilience, your history of surviving difficult things, none of these things make you immune. You are still a human being operating inside of a body, relationships, emotional systems, and organizational environments that register pressure, whether you acknowledge it or not. And there is a strength in admitting that because the alternative is not invincibility. The alternative is delayed consequence. You do not lose your leadership credibility by recognizing your limits. You strengthen your leadership by refusing to make everyone else pay for limits you will not acknowledge. You do not become less committed when you build a healthier operating rhythm. You become sustainable. You do not become less valuable when others learn how to lead without your constant intervention. You have created an organization that can outlive your personality. You do not lose edge by becoming emotionally honest. You gain access to information that performance alone cannot provide. Let me leave you with this. The strongest leader in the room is not the one who can absorb unlimited pressure. It is the one who can recognize when pressure is beginning to distort their leadership. And you do not have to collapse to prove that the weight was heavy. You are allowed to tell the truth before the crisis comes. You are allowed to change your pattern before negative consequences arrive. You can stop confusing exhaustion with excellence. You can be allowed to build success that does not require destruction of you as a person. This has been week 3 of the Reckoning series. The Invincible Lie, Why High Performers Believe They Are the Exception to Burnout. I'm Lena Morris, founder and CEO of Authentic Encounters, LLC. And at Authentic Encounters, I work with CEOs, executive teams, and senior leaders, boards, and organizations to identify hidden leadership behaviors, culture risks, and decision-making patterns that undermine trust, alignment, accountability, and organizational performance. Because leadership risk does not always announce itself through a dramatic failure. Sometimes it looks like a high-performing leader who is still producing while everything around them is beginning to pay the price. Don't wait for the crisis to give you permission to reset. Visit AuthenticEncountersLLC.com and reserve your place in the Leadership Reset Room or in the Relationship Reset Room. You do not need more advice. You need a room. And before you leave this episode, share it with a CEO, a founder, a board member, a high-performing leader who needs this conversation. Also, subscribe to Lena Speaks, the podcast, so you don't miss the next episode in this series. Until next time, remember, the reckoning is not punishment. It is the moment you finally stop negotiating with the truth.